The air was thick with the scent of lilies and sorrow, a sterile perfume trying to mask the finality of death. I was tracing the grain of the polished wood on Mark's casket, my fingers numb, my mind a hollow echo chamber of, "He's gone." That's when my brother-in-law David approached. He wasn't there to offer a comforting hand or a shared tear. In his eyes I saw the glint of victory. He leaned in close, his voice a smug whisper that cut through my grief. "So sorry for your loss, Sarah," he said, the words dripping with insincerity. Then, he pressed a folded document into my hand. An eviction notice. "Dad made me the executor," he continued, a small, cruel smile playing on his lips. "The house is in his name, technically. You have 30 days. He actually laughed, a short, sharp bark of a laugh, right there in front of my husband's body. He handed me an eviction notice at my own husband's funeral, thinking he had me cornered, a grieving widow with nothing left. He didn't know that my husband, Mark, had spent the last 6 months of his life preparing me for this exact moment. And as the door to the funeral home creaked open, David's laughter died in his throat. You might wonder why a man would do this and how his laughter could turn to panic so quickly. To understand that, we have to go back to the beginning, to the family I married into. From the moment I met them, Mark's family operated on a simple, brutal hierarchy. David was the golden child, the brilliant son destined for greatness. Mark, my Mark, was the quiet, steady one, the one they took for granted. He was the workhorse. David was the show pony. His mother, Carol, never let us forget it. Every family dinner was a performance, with David center stage, recounting his minor business successes, while Mark's steady promotions were met with a polite nod. They saw Mark as reliable, which to them meant predictable and boring. They saw me as the woman who had latched onto their son, a temporary fixture in a life that was supposed to be dedicated to supporting David's ambitions. We were the background characters in the grand story of David's life. What they never understood was that Mark didn't mind being in the background. He was building something real, something they couldn't see. And it was all for me. The man who walked in was Mr. Harrison, a sharp, older gentleman in a perfectly tailored suit. He was Mark's personal lawyer, a name David had probably never even heard. David's smirk vanished, replaced by a confused frown. He looked from Mr. Harrison to me, his brain scrambling to process this unexpected variable. The eviction notice in my hand suddenly felt flimsy, ridiculous. "This is a private family matter," David stammered, trying to regain his footing. He puffed out his chest, the way he always did when he felt challenged. "I'm the executor of my father's estate, which holds the deed. This house belongs to the family trust." He waved a dismissive hand, as if trying to shoo the lawyer away. Mr. Harrison didn't even glance at the paper I was holding. He addressed David with a voice as cold and hard as granite. "Mr. Miller, any action you take regarding this property is premature and, I assure you, legally indefensible. I am here to inform you, on behalf of my late client, Mr. Mark Miller, that there will be a formal reading of his final will and testament tomorrow at my office. I trust you and your mother will be in attendance." He handed David a crisp business card. 10 a.m., don't be late. David stared at the card like it was a snake. He couldn't comprehend it. In his world, Mark didn't have personal lawyers. Mark didn't have secrets. Mark just worked hard and handed over his earnings when the family needed it. I thought back to the day we broke ground on that house. Mark's father, Frank, had insisted on putting his name on the deed alongside Mark's. "It'll just be easier for the bank, son," he'd said, patting Mark on the back. "A temporary thing. We're all family here." We were young, and we trusted them. We poured every penny we earned, every ounce of our sweat, into that home. I learned how to lay tile, while Mark learned how to frame walls. We built it, board by board, while David was off buying fancy cars with money he'd borrowed from his parents. money we both knew came from the family business that Mark quietly kept afloat. The temporary thing was never undone. It was a chain they kept around Mark's neck, a constant reminder that no matter how hard he worked, they ultimately held the power. But as David stood there, speechless and pale, I could almost feel Mark's hand on my shoulder. He knew this would happen. He knew his family. And he had prepared the perfect response. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room we built, surrounded by ghosts of laughter and love. Grief was a heavy cloak. But underneath it, a different feeling was taking root. Resolve. Mark had spent his life being the dutiful son, the quiet supporter. His death, however, was going to be a roar. The next morning, I walked into Mr. Harrison's oak-paneled office 5 minutes early. I wore a simple black dress, the one Mark always said made me look powerful. David and his mother, Carol, were already there, huddled together on a leather sofa. They looked out of place, their suburban entitlement clashing with the quiet authority of the room. Carol, a woman whose approval I had once craved, shot me a look of pure venom. "Sarah," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "This is all so unnecessary. Dragging things out like this. David has everything under control. Mark wouldn't have wanted all this drama." The unspoken words hung in the air. You are the drama. You are the problem. David stood up, clutching a thin manila folder like it was a shield. "Mr. Harrison, we can make this quick. I have the estate documents here. There's not much to it. A small savings account, the car. As for the house, Sarah can stay for another month while she finds a place. We're being more than generous." He was performing for his mother, trying to re-establish himself as the one in charge. Just then, Mr. Harrison entered, carrying a thick, leather-bound portfolio. He nodded curtly at us and sat at the head of the large mahogany table. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Before we begin the reading of Mark's will, let's clear up a few preliminary items. First, this meeting is being recorded. Second, Mr. Miller, the documents you hold pertaining to your father's estate are noted. However, they are largely irrelevant to the matter at hand." He paused, letting the statement land. "We are here to discuss the assets and final directives of Mark Miller, which, as you are about to discover, were quite substantial and meticulously organized." He opened his portfolio. "For instance," he said, sliding a thick, bound document across the table. "Let's start with the house. This is a complete ledger, compiled by Mark over the last 15 years. It details every mortgage payment made from his personal account, every receipt for materials, and every invoice for contract work. It also includes a second ledger documenting $287,000 in personal loans made to the family business, primarily to cover debts incurred by you, David. All of it, with interest, has been legally filed as a lien against the family trust." Carol's jaw went slack. David looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. The silence in the room was broken by a sharp gasp from Carol. Her face, usually a mask of composed superiority, was twisted with disbelief. "That's a lie!" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Mark would never do that to his family. This is your doing. You poisoned him against us from the day you met him." David, recovering from the initial shock, scrambled to his feet. "This is ridiculous. These are faked. My lawyers will tear this apart." He tried to sound threatening, but his voice cracked. He was a boy playing dress-up in his father's suit, and the suit was suddenly 2 sizes too big. Mr. Harrison didn't flinch. "On the contrary," he said, his tone dangerously soft. "The documents are all quite real." He produced another file. "Here are the promissory notes for the business loans co-signed by your late father. And here," he added, turning a laptop screen towards David, "are the email chains from your personal account, asking your brother to cover your substantial gambling debts and a failed crypto investment. You referred to it as an emergency family situation. Mark saved everyone." David's face turned the color of ash. He sank back into his chair. The lien is ironclad, the lawyer continued, his voice cutting through their shock. The family trust's assets are effectively frozen. The home you tried to evict Mrs. Miller from is now the primary collateral against a debt that the trust, by my estimation, cannot pay. For the first time in their lives, I saw genuine fear in their eyes. Their power, their status, their entire identity was tied to that trust, and my quiet, unassuming husband had just put a lock on it and handed me the only key. Once the reality of their financial ruin had settled over them like a shroud, Mr. Harrison cleared his throat. "Now," he said, picking up a different document bound in blue, "to the last will and testament of Mark Daniel Miller." He began to read, but it wasn't a dry list of assets. It was a letter. It was Mark's voice, filling the room one last time. "To my family," the letter began, as read by Mr. Harrison. "If you are hearing this, it means I am gone, and I can finally speak without interruption. For years, I did my duty as a son and a brother. I worked hard, I kept quiet, and I gave what was asked of me. I did this out of love, but I see now that my silence was mistaken for weakness. My generosity was mistaken for foolishness. My greatest failure was not standing up for the one person who always stood by me, my wife, Sarah. This will is not an act of revenge. It is an act of correction. It is a final balancing of the books and a testament to the fact that my first and most important duty was always to her." I felt a single tear trace a path down my cheek as Mr. Harrison read Mark's words. Across the table, Carol and David were stone-faced, their shock curdling into resentment. The lawyer continued, "To my mother, Carol, and my brother, David, I leave the one thing you consistently valued most from me. Your inheritance is the forgiveness of the $287,000 debt you owe my estate. Consider it my final bailout. Let it be known that this was the sum total of your ambition for our relationship." It was a masterstroke. Not an act of mercy, but a public branding. He wasn't giving them a gift. He was publishing the receipt for their greed. David let out a choked, bitter laugh. "So that's it? He saddles the trust with a fake debt and then forgives it? What a joke." "So what's left for you, Sarah? A used car and a savings account with a few thousand in it? Congratulations." Mr. Harrison held up a hand. "I believe you are mistaken, Mr. Miller." He slid another, even thicker portfolio into the center of the table. For the past decade, Mark was not just a salaried engineer at his tech firm. He was a silent partner. His compensation package included significant stock options, which he managed with remarkable skill. He never sold a single share. As of this morning, the estimated value of Mark Miller's personal estate is approximately $7.2 million. The number hung in the air, a physical force that sucked all the oxygen out of the room. $7.2 million. Carol made a small, wounded sound like an animal. David's face was a mask of utter devastation. All those years they had mocked his boring job, his sensible car, his lack of flash. All that time, he was quietly building an empire while he was simultaneously funding their lifestyle. The workhorse wasn't just pulling the cart, he owned the whole farm. As Mark's sole beneficiary, this entire fortune now belongs to Sarah, Mr. Harrison stated plainly. "Finally," he concluded, looking at his notes, "regarding the house. Since the debt has been forgiven, the lien on the family trust is dissolved. However, Mark's will contains one final provision. He used his personal funds to pay off the original mortgage on the home years ago, a fact he kept to himself. He has left irrefutable proof of this. He gives his wife full authority to sue the trust for the entire value of the property. Or she can agree to waive that right in exchange for you, David, as the trust's executor, immediately signing over the deed, free and clear. The choice," he said, looking at me, "is entirely hers." And with that, he turned to me. Carol and David turned to me. Not with scorn, but with raw, desperate panic. I let the silence stretch. I looked at David, his face a pathetic mix of fear and rage. I looked at Carol, who was staring at the portfolio containing the details of Mark's fortune, as if it had physically assaulted her. For years, their opinions had felt like daggers. Their approval was a mountain I could never climb. Now, their thoughts were nothing but static. They had spent a lifetime making me feel small, and in one final, brilliant act of love, my husband had made sure they could never touch me again. I took a deep breath and spoke, my voice calm and clear. I'm not going to sue. A flicker of relief washed over David's face, but it died as I continued. Suing you would require me to spend more time in your presence, and I'm done with that. My life, from this point forward, will not have you in it. I turned to David. You will sign the deed over to me. Today. Now. Then I looked at them both. The two people who had caused my husband so much quiet pain. Mark was a better person than I am. He forgave your financial debt. I will not be so generous with the moral one. We are finished. After we leave this room, you will not contact me. You will not come to my home. If I see you on the street, I will look through you as if you are glass. You no longer exist. Mr. Harrison, without missing a beat, slid the deed transfer document and a pen in front of a stunned David. With a trembling hand, he signed the house over to me. Carol began to sob, not from grief, but from the sheer, impotent fury of losing everything she thought she controlled. After all we did for him, she whimpered. I didn't let her finish. I stood up, smoothing down my dress. I felt powerful. I felt free. Thank you, Mr. Harrison. For everything. I didn't give Carol or David another glance. I walked out of that office, leaving them to sit in the ruins of the kingdom they had built on my husband's back. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind me, and it felt like the closing of a tomb. That evening, I sat in my quiet house, my house. The eviction notice David had handed me at the funeral was on the coffee table. I picked it up, tore it into small, satisfying pieces, and dropped them into the fireplace. Watching the flames consume the paper, I knew this was never just about money or property. It was about respect. Mark had seen me, he had valued me, and he had made sure that in the end, the world would see it too. He had given me a future they could not tarnish. The grief for my husband was still there, a vast ocean inside me, but for the first time since he'd been gone, it was joined by a new feeling. Peace. The books were balanced. Justice, absolute and final, had been served.